Here's a guy who's supposedly about to tell you something that atheists don't want you to hear.
إني ألقى الإيناس في صومي وصلاتي ودعائي للرحمن وجميع الطاعات.
Alright, so the big yet irrelevant and pointless question, does God exist? And I find this question to be somewhat hypocritical, because disproving the existence of God comes from the same logic as disproving the existence of man. Now, if someone came to you and tried to convince you that they don't exist, they said, I'm actually on Mars, and I have these Martians that have plugged me into the Matrix, or they have these probes in my head, and they're making me think all of these crazy things. What do you think of this guy? You think this guy's completely lost it? This guy needs to seek some medical help. He needs to go to the loony bin, whatever it may be. You have to stay away from the guy. The whole shebang. So why don't we think the same way when someone questions the existence of God?
Because the existence of a God is not the simplest interpretation of our experience. A theist is actually more analogous to the guy who thinks he's on Mars than an atheist is. The world very much seems godless, just as it seems real. To infer that there is an invisible God behind it would be to infer the existence of something that is superfluous and not evident. Just as inferring that you're plugged into the Matrix is to infer something that is superfluous and not evident.
Now, people attempt to prove their own existence by something called empiricism. And that is by the belief that senses are like an absolute truth. So if you can see it, you can hear it, touch it, smell it, hear it, all of these sort of things, taste it, it exists.
Well, no, not quite. Empiricists acknowledge that there are such things as sensory illusions. Not everything that you experience with your senses exists. Empiricism is not so much the position that if something is apparent to the senses it exists, as it is that if a thing is not available to the senses, or if its existence isn't the simplest explanation for phenomena that are available to the senses, then there is no reason to infer that it does exist.
So they say, I can see, I can hear, therefore I exist.
Well, I would actually say that I am a set of neurological events which occur rather than an entity which exists. Seeing and hearing are events my brain carries out, and sensory experiences, along with other mental phenomena like interpretation, conceptualization, etc., are what constitute myself.
But what about your dreams? I mean, in a dream, can't you see, hear, sometimes taste? Or what about when someone's in the desert and they have a hallucination? If they're incredibly thirsty and it's very, very hot, they begin to see these streams of water. Does the water actually exist? Did the dream actually take place?
Again, empiricism is not the belief that things you see are real. It's the belief that things you can't see or whose effects you can't see are not worth considering to be real.
Obviously not. We don't need to sit there questioning it. So if you're going to attempt to prove your existence by empiricism, by the senses, then you have to either now say that the dreams or that the hallucinations actually took place and was actually existent, or that dreams didn't actually take place and the hallucination wasn't actually existent, the water that is, and so therefore you can't be using senses to prove your existence, because you'd find yourself contradicting yourself.
Since we're prone to delusions and illusions, our senses can't prove the existence of anything, but if they are consistent enough, they can be reasonably inferred to exist. Normal sensory experiences are consistent and stable in a way that dreams and hallucinations are not. That's how we can tell the difference between dreams, hallucinations, and normal sensory experiences. Sure, our normal sensory experiences could still possibly be exceptionally consistent and stable illusions or hallucinations, but if everything we experience is one big hallucination and we never actually experience the real world, we might as well treat our experiences as real since they make up the entirety of our lives. If all of my experiences are delusional and I don't know anything different, I might as well treat them as though they are real.
Now there's many philosophers who have spent, for the most part, the majority of their lives attempting to prove the existence of man. And for the most part, they cannot do so. In fact, the most logical answer that they've come towards proving the existence of man is the quote by Rene Descartes in his book, The Meditations, where he says, I think, therefore I am. Now let me tell you the contradiction in this statement. If you know anything about the world of mathematics and proof by induction, attempting to prove something, for example, the existence in this case, it's a complete no-no to begin with an assumption that you already exist.
Well, that's not really a contradiction. Rather, the problem with the formulation "I think, therefore I am" is that it begs the question. The I doing the thinking is already asserted in the premise from which the conclusion is drawn. It's circular. However, there is a non-circular way of restating this argument. Premise 1, if thoughts are occurring, there must be a thinker thinking those thoughts. This is a hidden premise in the original form of the argument. Premise 2, thoughts are occurring. Therefore, conclusion, a thinker exists. This is a perfectly valid modus ponens syllogism. However, I even have problems with this because it is the brain that is thinking the thoughts, but oneself is not really one's brain per se. Once your brain dies, it is no longer you. Rather, I think of the self as the occurrence of the thoughts and other mental events themselves. I believe that oneself is a series of events which occur rather than an entity which exists. If thoughts are occurring, that would be proof of the reality of the self because the self is the very occurrence of those thoughts. If thinking is occurring, then the self is real by definition.
I'll tell you what I mean. I think, therefore I am. You've begun the statement with I. I assumes existence. So you cannot prove existence whilst also assuming that you exist. It's contradictory.
No, it's circularly tautological, which is the opposite of a contradiction.
Now, does that mean that we don't exist? Does that mean that you, your mother, father, brother, sister, don't exist? Of course not. Of course you exist. I exist. We exist. But we don't need to spend any time into these completely trivial matters because it's not logical to do so. It's self-evident that me and you and him and her, they exist.
It's not self-evident, though. It seems much more to be the case that we are events which occur rather than entities which exist.
I mean, you don't need to spend any time in that point. Now, you probably didn't even question your own existence until this video. And if you did beforehand, you probably just would have tried to just get rid of it like that. Just thought it's a stupid thought. And the reason for that is because it's illogical. And the same thing would have happened for the existence of God.
I'm not sure these two things are analogous. Children show signs of having a concept of themselves at around 18 months of age, all on their own. But they need to be taught that a God exists. That's not a concept that forms from sensory experience the way selfhood does.
If you didn't get affected by this disease of atheism. And so why don't you question your own existence?
I do. That's why I think it makes more sense to say that I am a series of events which occur than an entity which exists.
And why do you question the existence of God?
Because I don't know what a God is or what it means to say that one exists. While sensory evidence isn't proof, it is still evidence. I have at least that much evidence of myself. I don't have any such evidence of a God, nor do I even know what such evidence would look like.
Now, the only way that anything makes sense, and I'll wrap up with this, the only way that anything makes sense is through the belief that you, the viewer of this video, exist.
Why doesn't it make sense if I am events which occur rather than a thing that exists?
And if you take that belief away, then anything ceases to have any value or meaning. Now, similarly, the only way that anything has any value or meaning is through the existence of God.
How does a God give anything value or meaning? Let's say there is a God, and that God deems certain things valuable and meaningful. Why do they have value and meaning just because a God says so?
And if you take that belief away, then absolutely everything and anything becomes completely irrelevant and meaningless.
Irrelevant to what? Anything has meaning if it has consequences for experience. Even without a God, I don't see why events wouldn't have consequences.
So you have two options. You've got two options. You either believe that God exists, and as a result of that, of course, man would exist.
What do you mean, of course? Why would that automatically follow?
Or you question your own existence.
Well, I do question my own existence, but I'd do that whether I believed a God existed or not.
Now, which one for you is more logical?
The second one. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.